Hi there everyone, it's Damien. So I was asked the question, is it possible to retrieve specific data from a system generated email and save that into a SharePoint list? So in this particular example, I'm going to look at a ServiceNow email that's automatically generated every time a call is logged on their system. And here I'm going to jump into the email that's received from ServiceNow. So you'll notice here we've got a request number, a requested for, raised by, requested items, and a description of the call. This data is actually HTML and stored as an HTML table, and so we'll use that later on as a method for extracting the data. I'll now jump onto my Power Automate and demonstrate how I do this. So using the standard action, I get the email from my Outlook mailbox, and then I move on to cleansing the data, which for the purpose of this demo I've put within a scope just to keep things nice and tidy. So my first action here is the select action, and you'll notice I'm using the index of expression. And so what that does is it takes a string as a first input and then looks for the string as a second input of the expression and returns a number. So it's looking for where that string exists and return that position as a number. Here, for the end of the table, I've done exactly the same, but rather than using the opening tag for table, I've used the closing tag for table. And so now I've got both the start and the finish character number within the string of the HTML, which I'll use within my next action. So I've used an expression here called substring, which takes an original string, in this case the email body, and then a start location and a finish location. So using those two calculations that I've done before, using the expression index of, I now have the start and finish location of my HTML table. And so within this compose action now, I just have a string containing that HTML table. And in order to demonstrate that, I'm going to quickly jump across onto this HTML editor. So if I just do a quick search, you'll see how the table tags are highlighted. It's these tags that I'm using in order to split the text. Similarly, we have a table row tag, which is going to be extremely useful later on for splitting up the table itself into an array. So I'm now going to hop back across onto my flow. So onto my next action. I'm taking the table that I've just retrieved using the compose action above, and I'm splitting that string into an array using that table row tag that I just spoke about. So if we look at my email and I highlight the table we've got here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows. So those 8 rows have now been retrieved using the table tags, and then I've used the split expression to split that into 8 individual elements of an array. Back onto the flow. So a little hack, a little trick. I'm going to use a double return line later on for performing another split. So all I've done here is create a compose action, and I've hit my return button twice, and I'm going to use that compose action later on in another split. I'm going to skip this particular scope here because I use it in the demonstration during the test run of the flow. I'm now going to move on to returning the elements. So this particular action, HTML to text, takes an HTML string and it strips out any of the HTML tags and returns the strings of characters that are contained within that. So what I've done here is using the output of the split from the action above. So here we have the output of the split. I'm returning the fourth element, in which in this case referred to as the third because we begin from the number 0. So you'll notice there on the expression that it has in square brackets the number 3. So that returns the fourth element of our array. If I jump back onto my email, you'll see that 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth row, which I'll try and highlight now, is the element of the array that we're going to return. And that itself is then going to become an array of 3 items. So back onto our flow again, we now have the results from this HTML to text action, and we're going to split that and turn that into an array. And during testing, I discovered that when we use this HTML to text action, it's managed to insert a double return line, and so that's why earlier on I've used the compose action with a double return line in order to perform a split on that HTML to text using the double return line, and that will return the 3 elements of our array, which, if we look back at the email again, are these 3 items here. So now, in order to return the request number, the requested for, and the raised by, we're going to use the output of the array from the compose action above, and we're going to return element 0. Similarly, for the second line, we return element 1, which you'll see in the expression there in the square brackets, the number 1. And then finally, for line 3, if we look at the expression again, we're going to return the element 2, which is the third element. So now we have the first 3 elements of the 4th row, which happens to be the 4th element of the array that we initially created. Now we're going to try and get the RITM number and the call description. So if we just look at this, row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 are the elements of the array that we need to now return in our Power Automate. If we return back to our Power Automate and have a look at this HTML to text action again, you'll see that I'm using the output from the split and element number 5, which happens to be number 6 because we start from 0. Similarly, for the call description, we've got the output number 6, which happens to be number 7, so our 7th row. And then finally, I use the create item action, and using these dynamic fields that I've created, I'm saving these into our SharePoint list. So hopefully now that I've covered this, I'll do a test run and things will start to become clearer. Okay, so here's the flow. It's triggered. We've managed to retrieve our email, and we're going to move on to the HTML cleanse. So if you remember before, I used the index of, so we can see that the first table tag of the HTML appears at character number 2356. The closing tag for HTML appears at 2704. And then using the expression for the string, we managed to get the table as an input and an output. And then we move on to the next composer action, which splits the results of this by the table row tag, which we can see here. There's our table row tag, and creates an array. And in this case, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8 row items. And again, if we refer back to the email, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we now have our table as rows in an array, and we're going to use that in the next stage. So I didn't explore the array scope that I had spoken about in the when I was editing my Cloudflow, but I'm going to use it now for the demonstration. So you can see here I've got an apply to each that will go through each of the 8 elements of this array, and then I use the HTML to text split. So we'll move on to something a bit more meaningful, and you can see here that the second element of this apply to each returns the following text: a request for following item has been raised and requires your attention. And we can see that the second row is exactly that string. If I move on to the third, you'll see we have the headers from the table: request, requested for, and raised by. So request, requested for, and raised by. And so on. You'll see each of the strings contained within. Now you remember I mentioned that I needed to use a double return line. This is why. I use a double return later on in order to split this text, but I've inserted this particular scope here purely just to demonstrate how the data is retrieved from the HTML table. And here we have the RITM number and also the description of the call. So if we have a quick run over the return of the elements, using the HTML to text, as before, I've managed to retrieve the row number 4 that contains the request number and the requested by and requested for. And then in order to get that results as an array, I've split using that double return line, which as you can see now returns the 3 individual elements of that array nicely formatted, and I've managed to drop these blank lines using that double return. And then by calling the individual elements 012, I get the request number, I get that Jane Doe requested it, and John Doe did the other request or raised by. And then finally, if we move on to both the RITM reference and the call description, as they sit on their own individual rows, they're straightforward to return with no need to split any of that text into an array. So the final part of that flow was, of course, to create an item within my SharePoint list. And if I just jump across onto my SharePoint list, you can see that I have the request number, the requested for, requested by, call reference, and call description. And all of that data had been stripped out of this HTML table within an email that was generated by ServiceNow. So I'm really hoping you're able to follow that. I really hope it was of use to you. And if you have any questions, please leave a comment below. And similarly, if you have an example of your own that you'd like me to investigate, please get in touch. I would love a challenge. And as always, please make sure you like and you subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers. Bye.